The Livingston plantation sprawled across 300 acres of fertile Mississippi soil, its cotton fields stretching toward the horizon like a sea of white when in bloom. In the sweltering summer of 1855, those fields had become a hell on earth for the 5 individuals whose fates would soon be bound together in blood and desperation. Elijah, the eldest at 38, had been born on the plantation, his body bearing the marks of a lifetime under the lash. His broad shoulders, once powerful, now stooped slightly from decades of cotton picking and timber hauling. In the fields they called him preacher, for the scripture he would recite under his breath, though there was nothing of forgiveness in his eyes when he looked toward the big house. Beside him worked Ruth, 31, a woman whose delicate features belied her inner strength. Sold to the Livingstons 5 years prior, she had left 3 children behind on a plantation in Georgia, their faces preserved only in her memory. The separation had hollowed something in her, replacing maternal tenderness with a cold, calculating patience. She watched and waited, her hands moving mechanically through the cotton plants, while her mind remained sharp as a thorn. Moses, 26, had the powerful build of a blacksmith, his hands calloused and scarred from the forge. Master Livingston prided himself on owning a skilled smith, parading Moses's craftsmanship to visitors, while treating the man himself as little more than a valuable tool. The irons Moses forged had bound many of his fellow slaves, a bitter irony that burned in his gut like acid. Samuel, 23, was the fastest field hand on the plantation, his lean body seemingly built for endurance. The overseers drove the other slaves to match his pace, creating a simmering resentment that Samuel carried like a weight. He had attempted escape once, 2 years earlier, making it nearly 30 miles before the hounds tracked him down. The scars on his back and the metal collar he had worn for 6 months afterward served as a constant reminder of the consequences of failure. The youngest was Naomi, barely 20, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that missed nothing. Born on a neighboring plantation, she had been purchased by Master Livingston as a house servant, but was demoted to field work after rebuffing his eldest son's advances. In the big house, she had learned to read by secretly studying the family's books, a dangerous knowledge she kept hidden behind a carefully maintained mask of ignorance. On this particular morning in late July, the air hung heavy with humidity, the sun already merciless, though it had barely cleared the tree line. Overseer Jenkins stood at the edge of the field, pocket watch in hand, his face twisted in a perpetual scowl beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Beside him, his assistant Rodney Fletcher fingered the coiled whip at his belt, eager for any excuse to use it. "Faster, you lazy devils!" Jenkins shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "Anyone not meeting their quota today gets a taste of Fletcher's special medicine." The slaves moved through the rows of cotton, backs bent, fingers bleeding from the sharp bowl casings. None dared to look up, to show any sign of defiance or exhaustion. All except Elijah, who straightened momentarily to wipe sweat from his brow, his eyes meeting Jenkins across the field. "You!" Jenkins pointed directly at Elijah. "You think you're special, preacher? Think you can take a rest while everyone else works?" Fletcher uncoiled his whip with practiced ease, a smile spreading across his sunburned face. "Want me to remind him of his place, Mr. Jenkins?" "Later," Jenkins replied, checking his watch again. "Master Livingston's coming to inspect the fields today. Save it for the evening demonstration." The words sent a ripple of fear through the field hands. Evening demonstrations were Jenkins' specialty, public whippings designed to break not just the body of the unfortunate victim, but the spirit of all who were forced to watch. As the day wore on under the punishing sun, the 5 slaves exchanged glances across the cotton rows, a wordless communication born of shared suffering. Something had changed in the air, a tension beyond the usual daily torment. Master Livingston's visits to the fields were rare and never boded well for those who worked them. Midday came with no relief from the heat. The slaves were allowed a brief rest, gathering in what little shade could be found at the field's edge. Elijah moved near Ruth, his voice barely audible as he murmured, "It's tonight." Ruth's eyes widened slightly, but she gave no other indication of surprise. "How do you know?" "Heard the house servants talking. Master Livingston's brother arrived from New Orleans this morning. They're discussing a sale." Samuel, who had edged closer to listen, inhaled sharply. "Who?" "Don't know for certain," Elijah replied, his calloused fingers breaking a piece of cornbread into smaller portions. "But I heard your name, Samuel, and Moses." Moses joined their circle, accepting his meager share of bread with a nod. Makes sense. Master's been expanding the house, needs cash. We'd fetch a good price in New Orleans. Naomi was the last to join them, her movements casual as if she had merely sought the shade. It's not just a sale, she whispered. It's worse. I overheard Master and his brother while serving breakfast. They're discussing breaking up the plantation entirely. Everyone's to be sold, scattered to different buyers. The news hit like a physical blow. Being sold was always a hovering threat, but the complete dissolution of the plantation meant the severing of every fragile connection, every relationship that made their existence bearable. Families would be torn apart, friends separated, the small community that had sustained them through collective suffering destroyed forever. When? Samuel asked, his voice tight. After the harvest, Naomi replied. But the initial selections happen this week. That's why Master's coming to the fields today, to assess who brings the best price where. A heavy silence fell over the group, each lost in private calculations of loss and survival. It was Ruth who finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who had already lost everything once before. I won't be sold again, she said simply. I won't be separated from what little I have left. Elijah nodded slowly, his eyes moving to each face in turn. We've talked about this day. Some of you more than others. The question is, are we just talking or are we ready? Before anyone could answer, Fletcher's voice cut through the brief moment of solidarity. Break's over. Back to work, unless you want to feel this whip. The 5 dispersed immediately, returning to their assigned rows with the practiced obedience of those who had learned that survival sometimes depended on the appearance of submission. But something had shifted, a decision crystallizing in each mind separately yet simultaneously. As predicted, Master Edward Livingston arrived in the fields that afternoon, mounted on his chestnut stallion, his brother Theodore riding beside him. They moved slowly along the edge of the cotton field, pointing occasionally at particular slaves, consulting a ledger that Edward carried. That one there, Theodore said, indicating Moses with his riding crop. How much are you asking? 1,500, Edward replied. He's a skilled blacksmith, trained from childhood, worth every penny. Theodore nodded appreciatively, then turned his attention to Samuel. And him? Strong-looking boy. 1,200, though I might go higher at auction. He's fast, never tires. Tried to run once, but Fletcher broke him of that notion. The brothers continued their appraisal, discussing human beings as one might discuss livestock or furniture. When they approached the section where Naomi worked, Theodore's interest visibly sharpened. The girl there, mulatto, isn't she? She'd fetch a premium in New Orleans, especially with that face. Edward's expression darkened. She was in the house until last year. Too much attitude. Thought herself above her station. A few months in the fields have improved her disposition somewhat. Still, Theodore mused, after a proper training, I know several gentlemen who would pay handsomely for her. 2,000 at least. From the corner of her eye, Naomi could see Moses's hands tighten around his hoe, his knuckles whitening with suppressed rage. She gave an imperceptible shake of her head. Not now, not here, in broad daylight with no plan and no hope of success. As evening approached, the slaves were herded back toward the quarters, exhausted from the day's labor under the merciless sun. Jenkins and Fletcher followed on horseback, Jenkins consulting a list in his hand. Elijah, Moses, Ruth, Samuel, and Naomi, he called out. You 5 stay behind. Master has special instructions for your work tomorrow. The 5 exchanged quick glances, a current of understanding passing between them. This was not about work assignments. This was the beginning of the separation, the process that would see them sold away to different corners of the South, never to meet again. As the other slaves continued toward the quarters, casting sympathetic glances back at those detained, Elijah felt a strange calm settle over him. The moment of decision had arrived, forced upon them by circumstance. The trigger had been pulled. What remained was the response. Jenkins approached the 5, a malicious satisfaction evident in his face. Master Livingston has decided that some of you need a reminder of your place before the buyers come next week. Seems he thinks you've been getting ideas above your station. Fletcher uncoiled his whip with practiced ease. Starting with you, preacher. Tonight's demonstration is going to be special. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the field, turning the world blood red, Elijah straightened his back and looked directly into Jenkins's eyes, not with defiance, but with the serene certainty of a man who had reached the end of one path and stood at the beginning of another. "The Lord is my shepherd," he said quietly, the familiar psalm taking on a new ominous meaning in the crimson light of dusk. "I shall not want." The slave quarters of the Livingston plantation consisted of 12 crude cabins arranged in 2 rows, their weathered boards offering little protection from the elements and even less privacy. At the end of the row stood a larger structure used for both punishment and storage, the correction house, as Master Livingston euphemistically called it. It was to this building that Jenkins and Fletcher led the 5 selected slaves as darkness fell. Inside, iron rings were embedded in the walls, chains hung from ceiling beams, and various implements of torture were displayed with deliberate prominence. Whips of different weights and lengths, iron restraints, and a brazier used for heating the branding irons. "Strip," Jenkins ordered Elijah, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of a man accustomed to absolute power over others. "Time to show everyone what happens to slaves who think too highly of themselves." Elijah removed his tattered shirt with dignified slowness, revealing a back already mapped with the scars of previous whippings. Fletcher secured his wrists to the iron rings mounted on the center post, while Jenkins selected a particular whip from the wall, a heavy bullwhip with 9 knotted leather tails designed to tear flesh rather than merely bruise it. "The rest of you line up against the wall," Jenkins instructed the other 4. "You're going to watch carefully because each of you is next. Master Livingston wants this lesson to sink in deep before the buyers come." Moses, Ruth, Samuel, and Naomi were positioned to have a clear view of Elijah's bound form. Fletcher moved among them, checking that their restraints were secure, lingering unnecessarily as he fastened Naomi's chains, his breath hot against her neck. "Maybe we'll have some private time after the others are finished," he whispered, his hand sliding down her arm. "If you're nice to me, I might put in a good word with Master about keeping you here instead of selling you downriver." Naomi kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her face an expressionless mask that revealed nothing of the rage boiling beneath. Fletcher's unwanted touch was not new. It was merely the latest in a lifetime of violations, large and small, that had gradually hollowed out any capacity for fear, leaving only a cold, implacable resolve. Jenkins positioned himself behind Elijah, testing the whip with a few practice swings that cut the air with an ominous whistle. "Count them out loud, preacher," he instructed. 20 to start. We'll see if you need more after that." The first lash landed with a sickening crack, tearing through Elijah's scarred skin and drawing blood immediately. "1," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the pain that must have been excruciating. The second lash crossed the first, creating an X of torn flesh. 2. By the 5th stroke, Elijah's back was a mess of bloody furrows, yet his voice remained firm, almost detached, as if the pain belonged to someone else. 5. Jenkins paused, clearly frustrated by Elijah's composure. "I think you're tough, preacher. Let's see how you handle this." He dipped the tails of the whip in a bucket of brine before delivering the 6th lash. The salt-soaked leather tore into the open wounds, and for the first time, Elijah's control slipped. A low groan escaped his lips before he managed 6. Against the wall, the other 4 watched in enforced silence, each experiencing Elijah's torture in their own way. Moses strained against his chains, the muscles in his arms standing out like cords as he fought the urge to break free and attack the overseers. Samuel's face was wet with silent tears of rage and helplessness. Ruth's expression remained stone-like, but her eyes burned with a cold fury as she memorized every detail of Jenkins' technique, the way he held the whip, the rhythm of his breathing. And Naomi watched Jenkins and Fletcher, not Elijah. She studied their positions, noted the keys hanging from Jenkins' belt, observed the way Fletcher kept his pistol tucked in his waistband, always within reach. Her mind worked with precise calculation, storing information that would soon prove vital. The whipping continued, each stroke drawing a fresh line of blood down Elijah's back. By the 15th lash, his responses had become slurred, his body sagging against the restraints as consciousness began to slip away. "Wake him up," Jenkins ordered Fletcher, wiping sweat from his brow. "He doesn't get to escape that easily." Fletcher grabbed a bucket of water and threw it over Elijah's head and torn back. The shock of the cold water combined with the salt entering his wounds jerked Elijah back to full awareness, a hoarse cry finally breaking from his lips. "That's more like it," Jenkins said with satisfaction. "Now where were we? 15, wasn't it?" 15, Elijah confirmed, his voice now ragged but still defiant in its calm. The remaining 5 lashes were delivered with particular brutality, Jenkins putting his full strength behind each stroke. When he finally stepped back, Elijah's back was a mass of shredded flesh and exposed muscle, blood running freely down to soak the waistband of his trousers. "Cut him down," Jenkins instructed Fletcher. "It's the blacksmith's turn next." As Fletcher moved to unlock Elijah's restraints, the bound man suddenly spoke, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the silence of the correction house. "Psalm 23, he said, as if continuing a sermon interrupted. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pasture." Jenkins laughed. "Still preaching, are you? Maybe another 10 lashes will shut you up." But Elijah continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Something in his tone caused Jenkins to pause, a flicker of unease crossing his face. This was not the desperate prayer of a broken man, but the calm declaration of someone who had moved beyond fear. "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," Elijah continued, turning his head slightly to look directly at Jenkins. "Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over." Fletcher finished unlocking the restraints, and Elijah slumped forward, barely able to stand. Yet somehow, he straightened himself, standing tall despite his wounds, his eyes moving from Jenkins to Fletcher, then to each of his 4 companions chained against the wall. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life," he concluded, "and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." In the silence that followed, something passed between the 5 slaves, an unspoken confirmation, a final decision. Years of accumulated suffering, of dignity denied and humanity rejected, crystallized in that moment into a single, unified resolve. "Enough Bible talk," Jenkins snapped, uncomfortable without understanding why. "Moses, you're next. Get over here." As Moses was led to the whipping post, his massive frame dwarfing Fletcher, who was securing his restraints, Ruth began to hum softly, a low, mournful tune that Naomi and Samuel soon joined. The melody filled the correction house, replacing Elijah's scripture with something older, a song brought from Africa generations ago and passed down as a secret language among the enslaved. "Shut up!" Jenkins shouted, striking Ruth across the face with the back of his hand. No singing. The humming stopped, but the damage was done. The air in the correction house had changed, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Fletcher's neck stand up. "Just get on with it," he muttered to Jenkins. "I don't like this." Jenkins positioned himself behind Moses, raising the whip for the first stroke. But before he could bring it down, there was a sudden commotion at the door of the correction house. One of the house servants burst in, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Jenkins, Master wants you at the big house right away. There's a problem with the ledgers for tomorrow's meeting with the buyers." Jenkins lowered the whip, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Can't it wait? I'm in the middle of something here." "Master said immediately, sir. He's in a rage about some discrepancy in the accounts." Jenkins cursed under his breath. "Fletcher, keep them chained. I'll be back as soon as I sort this out." He hung the whip back on its hook and strode out, slamming the door behind him. Fletcher shifted nervously, suddenly aware that he was alone with 5 slaves, 1 badly injured, but 4 still capable of resistance if they broke free. He checked his pistol, making sure it was loaded, then positioned himself where he could watch all of them. "Don't get any ideas," he warned. "Jenkins will be back soon, and then we'll continue your education." Minutes passed in tense silence. Fletcher paced the length of the correction house, his confidence visibly diminishing the longer Jenkins was absent. Outside, the plantation had grown quiet as night fully descended, the other slaves confined to their cabins, the white household focused on the big house and whatever crisis had summoned Jenkins. "Water," Elijah said suddenly, his voice cracked with thirst and pain. "Please." Fletcher hesitated, then moved to the bucket he had used earlier. "Fine, but just a little. Don't want you passing out before Jenkins gets back to finish your lesson." He dipped a ladle into the water and approached Elijah cautiously, holding the pistol ready in his other hand. As he extended the ladle toward Elijah's parched lips, the injured man lunged forward with unexpected strength, headbutting Fletcher directly in the face. The impact was devastating. Elijah's forehead connected with Fletcher's nose with a sickening crunch. The overseer staggered backward, blood streaming down his face, the pistol dropping from his hand as he reached instinctively to cradle his shattered nose. Ruth moved with astonishing speed for someone in chains, her foot shooting out to kick the fallen pistol toward Moses, whose longer reach allowed him to grasp it despite his restraints. In the same fluid motion, Ruth wrapped her chains around Fletcher's neck from behind, pulling them tight with all her strength. "Keys!" she hissed as Fletcher struggled and clawed at the chains cutting off his air. Naomi had already spotted them, a ring of iron keys hanging from Fletcher's belt. With her hands still chained but her feet free, she maneuvered close enough to hook the ring with her toe, dragging it toward Samuel, who managed to grab them. "Quick," Moses urged, the pistol now trained on the door in case Jenkins returned. "Get us out of these chains." Samuel worked frantically at the locks, freeing himself first, then Naomi, Ruth, and finally Moses. Ruth maintained her hold on Fletcher, whose struggles were weakening as his face turned from red to purple, his eyes bulging with desperation. "Elijah," Naomi whispered, hurrying to the injured man who had slumped to the floor after his attack on Fletcher. "Can you walk?" "I'll manage," he replied, though his voice was faint and his skin ashen from blood loss. "Don't wait for me if I can't keep up." "We're not leaving you," Moses stated firmly, taking position by the door while Samuel helped Elijah to his feet. "We go together or not at all." The decision made years ago in whispered conversations, reinforced through shared suffering, and finalized in the silent communication during Elijah's whipping, was now in motion. There would be no turning back, no mercy, no hesitation. The last chains of restraint, physical and psychological, had been broken. Fletcher's struggles had ceased entirely, his body limp in Ruth's implacable grip. She held the chains tight for several seconds longer, ensuring he would never again raise a whip against another human being, then let his body crumple to the floor. "We need weapons," Samuel said, retrieving Fletcher's whip from the wall and coiling it around his arm. "And we need to move fast." Moses checked Fletcher's pistol, a 6-shot revolver, fully loaded except for one chamber kept empty for safety. 5 bullets, he announced. Not enough. Naomi moved to the implements hanging on the walls, selecting a sharp iron hook used for baling cotton. Ruth chose a heavy iron bar, testing its weight in her hands with grim satisfaction. "Jenkins will be back soon," Elijah reminded them, leaning heavily against the wall, his wounds still seeping blood. "And we need to decide, just escape, or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The unspoken question hung in the air. Would they simply flee, or would they exact revenge on those who had tormented them for so long? The answer came in Moses's cold, deliberate voice. "We take care of Jenkins when he returns. Then we deal with Master Livingston and anyone else who tries to stop us." He looked at each of his companions in turn. "After tonight, we are no longer slaves. We are free people fighting for our lives." No one objected. The die was cast, the Rubicon crossed. What had begun as a desperate bid for survival had transformed into something more profound, a reclamation of humanity too long denied, a declaration written not in ink, but in blood. As they waited in the shadows of the correction house for Jenkins to return, each of the 5 carried within them the accumulated weight of lifetimes spent in bondage, childhoods stolen, families torn apart, dignity trampled, bodies abused. That weight, once a burden that bent them toward the earth, now fueled a terrible resolve that straightened their backs and hardened their hearts. The breaking point had come and gone. What remained was the reckoning. Jenkins' return to the correction house was heralded by his angry muttering, audible through the closed door as he approached. "Damn fool mistake in the ledgers. Waste of my time. Fletcher better have kept them in line." The 5 concealed themselves in the shadows of the dimly lit building, their positions carefully chosen for maximum advantage when the overseer entered. Moses stood behind the door, Fletcher's pistol held ready. Ruth and Naomi flanked the entrance, their improvised weapons poised to strike. Samuel crouched in the corner, prepared to launch himself forward if needed. Elijah, too weak from his wounds to participate directly, sat propped against the far wall, his eyes fixed on the door with fierce intensity. The latch lifted, and Jenkins stepped inside, momentarily blinded by the transition from moonlight to the correction house's gloom. "Fletcher, where—" Moses struck first, swinging the heavy door shut behind Jenkins and pressing the pistol to the back of his head. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice low and deadly. "Don't speak." Jenkins froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt, before Ruth's iron bar came down on his wrist with bone-shattering force. He opened his mouth to scream, but Naomi was ready, shoving a wadded cloth between his teeth and tying it in place with brutal efficiency. "On your knees," Moses ordered, forcing Jenkins down with a heavy hand on his shoulder. The overseer's eyes darted around the room, widening in terror as he spotted Fletcher's body crumpled on the floor, then moving to the 5 slaves now standing over him, unchained, armed, transformed from victims to executioners in the space of a single hour. "You killed Fletcher," he tried to say through the gag, the words emerging as muffled grunts. "Yes," Ruth confirmed, her face impassive as she looked down at the man who had overseen countless whippings, who had separated mothers from children without a second thought, who had wielded absolute power with casual cruelty for years. "And now, we decide what to do with you." The 5 gathered in a tight circle around their captive, the power dynamic reversed for the first time in their lives. Jenkins knelt before them, his broken wrist cradled against his chest, his face pale with shock and fear. "We need information," Moses said, addressing his companions while keeping the pistol trained on Jenkins. "How many guards are posted tonight? Where are the horses kept? Which way is the quickest route to the swamp?" Samuel removed Jenkins' gag just enough to allow him to speak. "Answer truthfully," he warned, "or things will go very badly for you." Jenkins licked his lips nervously, his eyes darting between the 5 faces surrounding him. "Listen," he began, a placating tone entering his voice. "I know you're angry, but think about what you're doing. If you surrender now, maybe Master will—" Ruth's iron bar connected with his shoulder, not hard enough to break bones, but with sufficient force to elicit a yelp of pain. "We're not interested in negotiations," she said coldly. "Answer the questions, or the next one takes your kneecap." Faced with the immediate threat of further pain, Jenkins's survival instinct overcame his loyalty to the plantation. "2 guards at the main gate," he gasped. "Another patrolling the perimeter, but he's usually half drunk by this hour. Horses are in the stable behind the big house, 8 of them, including Master's prized stallion." "The swamp?" Moses prompted, pressing the pistol harder against Jenkins' temple. "Southwest corner of the property. There's a trail the hunters use, but it's treacherous if you don't know it. Quicksand, snakes, gators. You'd be fools to try it, especially at night." "We'll take our chances with the swamp creatures," Naomi said. "They seem less monstrous than the ones we've lived with." "What about the dogs?" Samuel asked, knowing that their scent would be pursued once their escape was discovered. Jenkins hesitated, and Moses cocked the pistol with an ominous click. "The kennels are by the overseer's cabin," Jenkins said quickly. 6 hounds trained to track, they're fed at dawn." "And the nearest patrol?" Elijah asked from his position against the wall, his voice weak, but his mind still sharp. "The county slave patrol makes rounds every 3 days. They're due tomorrow afternoon." Jenkins' eyes darted toward the door, calculating his chances if he made a sudden move. Moses noticed the look and stepped closer, removing that possibility entirely. "What about the other slaves?" Ruth asked. "Will any of them raise the alarm?" Jenkins' laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "You really think they'd help the masters over their own kind? They'll keep quiet as long as possible, give you a head start. They hate me as much as you do." The 5 exchanged glances, silently conferring. The information matched what they already knew or had guessed, confirming that their hastily formed plan was viable, difficult and dangerous, but possible. "What now?" Samuel asked, the question directed not at Jenkins but at his companions. Naomi spoke first, her voice calm and deliberate. "We need supplies. Food, water, blankets. Something for Elijah's wounds. And we need to deal with the dogs," Ruth added. "If they pick up our trail, we won't make it to the swamp, let alone through it." Moses nodded in agreement. "Samuel and I will handle the dogs and get the horses. Ruth, you and Naomi find supplies and help Elijah. Meet at the southwest corner, by the old cypress with the split trunk." Jenkins listened to their planning with growing horror, realizing that these were not desperate slaves acting on impulse, but determined individuals executing a coordinated escape. "You'll never make it," he said, a note of desperation entering his voice. "Even if you get to the swamp, there's nowhere to go. Every plantation for 100 miles will be on alert. The patrols will hunt you down." "Maybe," Elijah acknowledged, his eyes meeting Jenkins with unnerving calm. "But we'll die free rather than live as slaves one day longer." The simple statement hung in the air, its truth undeniable even to Jenkins, who had spent his life enforcing a system he had never questioned. "What about him?" Ruth asked, gesturing toward Jenkins with the iron bar. "We can't leave him alive. He'll raise the alarm the moment we're gone." "We could tie him up," Samuel suggested, though without much conviction. "And gag him," Naomi added. "Buy ourselves a few more hours." Jenkins' eyes widened with desperate hope. "Yes, tie me up. I won't make a sound, I swear. You'll have until morning, at least." Moses looked down at the overseer, his expression unreadable. "The same mercy you showed Elijah today." Before Jenkins could respond, Moses turned to his companions. "We need to decide quickly. Every minute we waste increases the chance of discovery." A heavy silence fell over the correction house, broken only by the labored breathing of the injured Elijah and the faint whimpers of Jenkins as the reality of his situation sank in. The 5 who had been property that morning and would be fugitives by dawn now faced the most profound moral choice of their lives, whether to show mercy to one who had shown none, or to embrace the brutal calculus of survival. It was Ruth who finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who had seen her children torn away and sold like cattle. "There is no place in this world or the next for the mercy he seeks," she said quietly. "Not after what he's done. Not after what they've all done." One by one, the others nodded in somber agreement. Even Samuel, the youngest and least hardened among them, recognized the harsh truth of their situation. Leaving Jenkins alive meant leaving a mortal threat at their backs, a voice that would cry out for their recapture and punishment the moment they were gone. "Do it quickly then," Elijah said, closing his eyes as if in prayer. "And may God have mercy on all our souls." Moses raised the pistol, aiming it directly at Jenkins' forehead. The overseer began to tremble, tears streaming down his face as he begged incoherently for his life. The same man who had administered torture without hesitation now quailed before the judgment of those he had tormented. "Wait," Naomi said suddenly, staying Moses' hand. "Not with the gun. The sound will carry to the house." Moses lowered the pistol, acknowledging the wisdom of her caution. Ruth stepped forward, the iron bar gripped tightly in her hands. "I'll do it," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "For my children. For all the children." Jenkins' eyes bulged with terror as he understood what was coming. He tried to scramble backward, but Samuel and Moses held him firmly in place, ensuring there would be no last-minute escape. "Please," Jenkins whimpered, all pretense of authority gone. "I was just doing my job. I had no choice." "Neither do we," Ruth replied, raising the iron bar high above her head. The sounds that followed were mercifully brief, a dull thud of metal striking bone, a choked gurgle, then silence. Ruth continued her work with methodical precision, her face a mask of concentration rather than rage, until she was certain that Jenkins would never again threaten them or any other enslaved person. When it was done, she stepped back, the bloody iron bar hanging limply at her side. "It's finished," she said simply. The 5 regarded the bodies of their former tormentors with a complex mixture of emotions, not triumph or satisfaction, but a grim acknowledgement that this violence, though terrible, was merely the first step on the path to freedom. There was no time for reflection, no space for regret or celebration. The die had been cast, and now they must move with speed and purpose if they were to survive the night. "Clean yourselves as best you can," Moses instructed, taking charge naturally as the strongest among them. "Change clothes if there's anything usable here. We need to move now, while the house is quiet and the night is dark." They quickly divided the remaining tasks. Samuel found a shirt for Elijah, helping the injured man dress with gentle care. Naomi tore strips from a relatively clean cloth to bind Elijah's wounds, working efficiently despite the limited light. Ruth washed the blood from her hands and face in the remaining water, her movements mechanical, her mind already focused on the next stage of their desperate plan. Moses checked Jenkins' body, retrieving a hunting knife, additional ammunition for the pistol, and a small leather pouch containing money, resources that might mean the difference between life and death in the days ahead. He also took the keys to the various buildings on the plantation, knowledge gained from years of observation, now proving invaluable. "Remember," he said as they prepared to leave the correction house, "if we're separated, head for the cypress at the southwest corner. Wait no more than 10 minutes. If anyone doesn't arrive by then, the others must go on." They nodded in solemn agreement, understanding that individual sacrifice might be necessary for the group's survival. Elijah, leaning heavily on Samuel, managed to stand despite his injuries. "The Lord is with us," he whispered, though whether as prayer or reassurance was unclear. With a final look at the scene of their first act of rebellion, the five slipped out of the correction house and into the moonlit night, the tension of their situation winding tighter with each step toward an uncertain freedom. The Livingston plantation lay under a canopy of stars, deceptively peaceful in the blue-black darkness of the Mississippi night. Oil lamps burned in a few windows of the big house, where Master Livingston and his brother were likely still discussing the sales that would never come to pass. The slave quarters were dark and silent, their occupants either sleeping or lying awake, aware that something had changed but uncertain what morning would bring. Moses and Samuel moved like shadows toward the dog kennels, keeping to the deeper pools of darkness, freezing in place whenever the lone patrolling guard passed nearby. The night air carried the rich scents of summer, blooming jasmine, damp earth, and the ever-present undertone of the nearby swamp, a tangled wilderness of cypress and tupelo that represented both danger and hope. "6 dogs," Samuel whispered as they crouched behind a storage shed, watching the kennels where the hunting hounds were kept. "If they catch our scent." Moses nodded grimly. The hounds were specifically trained to track escaping slaves, their baying cries striking terror into anyone who had heard them on the hunt. "We'll handle it, then the horses." They waited for the patrol guard to pass again, noting his routine, a circuit that took approximately 15 minutes, with a predictable pause at the far side of the property where he would stop to drink from a flask hidden in his jacket. Once he was out of sight, they moved swiftly toward the kennels. The dogs sensed their approach, a low chorus of growls rising from the wooden structure. Moses placed a restraining hand on Samuel's arm. "Wait," he breathed. "Let them get used to our scent. We need them calm." For several long minutes they remained motionless near the kennel entrance, allowing the dogs to become accustomed to their presence. Gradually the growling subsided as the animals recognized them as familiar plantation workers rather than intruders. Moses produced a piece of dried meat from his pocket, part of their meager rations, saved specifically for this purpose. "Food first," he murmured. "Then we deal with them." Samuel swallowed hard, understanding what deal with them meant. He had no love for the creatures that had tracked down countless escaping slaves that would be used to hunt them if given the chance, but the thought of killing them still troubled him. These were not the architects of their oppression, but merely tools, much as the slaves themselves were viewed as tools by their masters. Moses sensed his hesitation. "It's them or us," he said simply. "Choose." The choice, when framed that way, was no choice at all. Samuel nodded, steeling himself for what must be done. They entered the kennel silently, Moses using Jenkins' keys to unlock the heavy padlock. The dogs stirred in their separate compartments, tails wagging at the unexpected nighttime visit, expecting food or perhaps a late hunt. Moses moved among them, offering bits of meat through the slats of their enclosures, speaking in low, soothing tones. As he distracted the animals, Samuel moved to the rear of the kennel where hunting equipment was stored. Among the leashes, muzzles, and tracking harnesses, he found what he was seeking, a container of strychnine used by the plantation hands to poison wolves and other predators that threatened the livestock. Working quickly, he mixed the poison with the remaining meat, creating 6 lethal portions. One by one, Moses fed these to the unsuspecting dogs, murmuring apologies even as he delivered death. The poison worked with terrible efficiency. Within minutes, the first dog began to convulse, its body arching in rigid spasms. The others followed in quick succession, their dying yelps mercifully muffled by the thick kennel walls. Samuel turned away, unable to watch, but Moses observed the process with unflinching attention, ensuring that their grim task was complete. "It's done," he said finally, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Now for the horses." They secured the kennel door behind them, ensuring that the evidence of their work would not be discovered until morning. The patrol guard was just visible in the distance, beginning another circuit of the property, his lantern a bobbing point of light in the darkness. "We should take him out too," Samuel suggested, his voice hardened by the night's events. One less person to raise the alarm. Moses considered this, weighing the risks. Too exposed, he decided. If we miss or if he manages to shout, let's stick to the plan. Horses first, then meet the others. They skirted the guard's path, making their way toward the stables located behind the big house. Here their task became more complicated. The proximity to the house increase the chance of discovery, and the horses themselves might create noise that would alert the household. The stable was a substantial structure, befitting the pride Master Livingston took in his horses. A single lantern burned inside, where a young stable boy, himself enslaved, slept on a pallet of straw near the entrance, charged with tending to the animals through the night. Moses and Samuel paused in the shadows, conferring in whispers. "We can't kill him," Samuel insisted, referring to the stable boy. "He's one of us." "Agreed," Moses nodded. "But we can't leave him to raise the alarm either." They approached the stable cautiously. Moses entered first, moving silently across the straw-covered floor to where the boy slept. Before the youth could fully wake, Moses had a hand clamped firmly over his mouth and the pistol pressed against his temple. "Not a sound," he warned, his voice barely audible. "We're leaving the plantation. You have a choice. Help us, and perhaps gain your own freedom, or stay behind. But if you raise the alarm, you won't live to see the morning." "Understand?" The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded beneath Moses' restraining hand. When Moses cautiously removed his palm, the boy remained silent, though his breathing came in rapid, shallow gasps. "What's your name?" Samuel asked, keeping watch at the stable entrance. "T. Thomas," the boy stammered, no more than 14 years old, thin and wiry from years of hard work and insufficient food. "Thomas, we need horses," Moses explained quickly. "4 of them, the strongest and fastest. Can you help us saddle them without making noise?" Thomas hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes," he whispered. "I know which ones. But where will you go? The patrols—" "The less you know, the safer you are," Moses interrupted. "Just help us with the horses." Working with the efficiency of long practice, Thomas selected 4 horses from the stable's occupants, sturdy, swift animals that could carry them far if properly managed. He helped Moses and Samuel saddle them, moving with deliberate quietness, though his hands trembled slightly with the enormity of his role in the escape. "What about you?" Samuel asked as they prepared to lead the horses out. "Will you come with us?" Thomas shook his head, fear evident in his young face. I can't. My mother and sisters, I can't leave them." Moses nodded in understanding. The bonds of family kept many enslaved people from attempting escape, the risk of separation or punishment too great to bear. "When they discover we're gone," he advised, "tell them we forced you, threatened you. Don't be a hero." "I won't," Thomas promised, "but I'll pray for you, all of you." With the horses ready, Moses faced a final decision. "We can't leave you free to sound the alarm, even accidentally." Thomas swallowed hard, but offered his wrists. "Tie me up. Make it look real." Samuel found rope used for leading the horses and bound Thomas securely but not cruelly, ensuring the bonds appeared tight while leaving enough slack for the boy to free himself after a suitable delay. They gagged him with a cloth, positioned him where he would be easily found in the morning, and left a water skin within reach. "Good luck," Thomas managed to whisper around the gag as they prepared to leave. "You too," Moses replied, a rare gentleness in his voice. "Maybe someday we'll meet as free men." Leading the horses as quietly as possible, Moses and Samuel left the stable and made their way toward the agreed meeting point, the ancient cypress at the southwest corner of the plantation. The animals were surprisingly cooperative, perhaps sensing the unusual nature of this nighttime journey, their hooves muffled by the soft earth of the path that skirted the cotton fields. Meanwhile, Ruth and Naomi had undertaken their own dangerous mission, infiltrating the plantation storehouse to gather supplies essential for survival in the swamp. With Elijah waiting in the shadow of a tool shed, too injured to participate actively, the 2 women approached the storehouse where food and equipment were kept under lock and key. Using Jenkins' ring of keys, they gained entry without difficulty, closing the door silently behind them before daring to light a small lantern they had brought. The interior of the storehouse was a treasure trove to people accustomed to deprivation: sacks of cornmeal and flour, barrels of salt pork, smoked meat hanging from rafters, and shelves lined with preserved fruits and vegetables. "Take only what we can carry and use quickly," Ruth advised as they filled cloth sacks with provisions. "Cornbread, jerky, dried fruit, nothing that will spoil or slow us down." Naomi nodded, selecting items with careful deliberation. Beyond food, she gathered other essentials: a small cooking pot, flint for starting fires, fishing hooks and line, a compass taken from the surveying equipment, bandages and salve for Elijah's wounds, and 2 sharp knives from the tool section. "Blankets," she murmured, spotting a stack of rough woolen blankets used for slave allotments. Nights get cold even in summer. They worked swiftly, aware that each passing minute increased the risk of discovery. When their sacks were full, they extinguished the lantern and slipped back outside, locking the storehouse behind them to delay the discovery of their theft. Retrieving Elijah from his hiding place, they made their way toward the meeting point, supporting the injured man between them. His condition had deteriorated, his skin hot with fever from his untreated wounds, his steps increasingly unsteady, yet he refused to slow their pace, driven by the same desperate determination that fueled them all. "Almost there," Ruth encouraged him as the massive cypress came into view, its split trunk creating a natural shelter against one side. Just a little further. As they reached the tree, Moses and Samuel emerged from the darkness leading 4 saddled horses, the animals' eyes rolling nervously at the unusual nighttime activity. The reunion was silent but powerful. 5 people who had begun the day as property now stood on the precipice of freedom, their fates bound together by blood and necessity. "The dogs?" Ruth asked quietly. "Taken care of," Moses confirmed. "And we have a friend in the stable who won't raise the alarm too quickly." "Supplies?" Samuel inquired, eyeing the bulging sacks. "Everything we could safely carry," Naomi replied. "Food for several days, basic tools, medicine for Elijah." Moses nodded in approval. "Good. Now we need to move. The swamp is half a mile beyond this point. Once we're in, they'll have trouble tracking us, but we need to put distance between us and the plantation before dawn." They divided the supplies among the horses, securing the sacks to the saddles. Moses helped Elijah mount, the injured man gritting his teeth against the pain as he was lifted onto the horse's back. "I'll walk," Naomi offered, seeing that the horses were already burdened. "I'm the lightest and I can keep up." "No," Moses countermanded. "You'll ride with Samuel. Ruth will ride with Elijah to keep him stable. We stay together as long as possible." With the arrangements made, they set off toward the swamp, moving as quickly as caution allowed. The horses picked their way carefully along the overgrown path, seemingly understanding the need for silence. Behind them, the Livingston plantation receded into darkness, the site of their lifelong imprisonment now forever behind them, if they could make good their escape. The edge of the swamp loomed before them like the threshold to another world. Massive cypress trees rose from the water, their knobby knees breaking the surface like the spines of submerged monsters. Spanish moss hung in ghostly curtains from the branches, creating a labyrinth of shadow and filtered moonlight. The air grew thicker, heavier with moisture, and the rich, rotting scent of vegetable decay. "We follow the hunter's path as far as it goes," Moses instructed, taking the lead. "Then we'll need to find our own way. The water will hide our scent from any dogs they bring in later." The path narrowed as they entered the swamp proper, forcing them to ride single file. The sounds of the plantation, cricket chirps, distant dog barks, the occasional shout of a guard, gave way to the primordial chorus of the wetland, the deep, resonant croaking of bullfrogs, the splash of unseen creatures entering the water, the eerie call of nightbirds, and beneath it all the constant drone of insects. For nearly an hour they traveled deeper into the swamp, the horses growing increasingly nervous as the path deteriorated and the water rose to their fetlocks, then their knees. The moonlight that had guided them earlier now barely penetrated the dense canopy overhead, forcing them to rely on instinct and the faint phosphorescence of decaying wood to mark their way. "We need to rest," Ruth called from behind, where she supported an increasingly delirious Elijah. "He's burning with fever. We need to tend his wounds." Moses hesitated, torn between the need to put more distance between themselves and their pursuers and the reality of Elijah's deteriorating condition. Finally, he nodded, guiding them toward a relatively dry hummock of land that rose slightly above the surrounding water. They dismounted carefully, helping Elijah down and laying him on one of the blankets they had brought. Naomi immediately began to unwrap his blood-soaked bandages, her face grim as she exposed the ravaged flesh beneath. "It's bad," she said quietly, reaching for the salve she had taken from the storehouse. "The wounds are infected. He needs more than what we have here." Elijah opened his eyes, momentarily lucid despite the fever. "Leave me," he rasped. "I'm slowing you down. The 4 of you can move faster without me." "No," Ruth said firmly, her hand finding his in the darkness. "We started together. We continue together." Moses knelt beside them, his massive frame silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. Rest for 1 hour, he decided. Then we move on, no matter what. Naomi, do what you can for him. Samuel, secure the horses. Ruth, help me check our back trail. As Naomi worked to clean and rebandage Elijah's wounds, Samuel tied the horses to low-hanging branches, allowing them to drink from the clearer pools of water. The animals were exhausted, but holding up well, their training for plantation work serving them now in this desperate flight through difficult terrain. Moses and Ruth backtracked a short distance, listening intently for any sound that might indicate pursuit. The swamp remained preternaturally quiet, disturbed only by natural sounds and their own careful movements. "Do you think we'll make it?" Ruth asked softly, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the wetland. Moses didn't immediately answer, his eyes scanning the darkness behind them. "We've come this far," he said finally, "further than most. But after the swamp, where do we go? North? Eventually. But first we need to lose any pursuit completely. That means deeper into the swamp, maybe all the way to the river. From there, I've heard stories of marooned communities hidden in the wilderness. People like us, who escaped and made new lives beyond the reach of the slave catchers." Ruth absorbed this in silence, the possibility of a life free from chains still too fragile to fully embrace. "And if they catch us?" Moses's hand moved to the pistol tucked into his waistband. "They won't take us alive, not after what we've done. Better a quick death than what they'd do to us if captured." The brutal honesty of this assessment hung between them, neither comforting nor frightening, simply the reality of their situation. They had killed 2 white men, stolen property, and fled bondage. There would be no mercy if they were caught, only prolonged public torture, designed to deter others from following their example. A sudden splash in the water nearby brought both of them to high alert, Moses drawing the pistol in one fluid motion. They froze, eyes straining to penetrate the darkness. "Gator," Ruth whispered, as a scaled form glided silently through the water, its eyes reflecting the minimal light like twin embers. "Big one." The alligator passed without showing interest in them, a reminder that human pursuers were not the only danger in their chosen refuge. The swamp was home to countless hazards: venomous snakes, alligators, quicksand, disease-carrying insects, and the ever-present risk of becoming hopelessly lost in the watery labyrinth. They returned to the others, finding Elijah slightly improved after Naomi's ministrations. The fever still burned, but he was more alert, insisting he could continue. Samuel had organized their supplies, rationing the food and water to extend their resources as long as possible. "Time to move," Moses announced as the agreed hour expired. "We keep heading southwest. There's a river in that direction, according to what I've heard the hunting parties say. If we can reach it, we might find a boat, or at least be able to travel faster along the bank." They helped Elijah back onto his horse, Ruth mounting behind him to keep him stable. The others followed suit, Samuel and Naomi sharing a mount while Moses led on the strongest horse, leaving the 4th to carry additional supplies. With grim determination, they pressed deeper into the swamp, leaving the last vestiges of the known world behind. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as the night wore on. The hunters' path petered out entirely, forcing them to choose their route based on where the water seemed shallowest and the ground most stable. Several times they were forced to backtrack when confronted with impassable sections of deep water or tangled vegetation. Dawn found them still in the heart of the swamp, exhausted but unbroken. The rising sun brought little illumination to the forest floor, its light captured and diffused by the dense canopy overhead. It did, however, reveal the full scale of their surroundings, a seemingly endless expanse of water, cypress, and floating vegetation stretching in all directions. "We should rest during the day," Samuel suggested, his young face haggard with fatigue. "Travel by night when it's cooler and there's less chance of being spotted." Moses weighed this advice against the need to put more distance between themselves and any pursuit. "A few more hours," he decided, "then we'll find a place to hide and rest until dusk." They continued their arduous journey, the horses struggling now as the water frequently rose to their barrels, forcing them to swim short distances between patches of firmer ground. The heat increased as the morning progressed, bringing with it clouds of biting insects that tormented both humans and animals indiscriminately. It was Ruth who first heard the sound, faint but unmistakable, carrying across the water from somewhere behind them. "Dogs," she said, her voice tight with renewed fear. "They've brought the dogs from another plantation." The others stopped to listen, and soon they all heard it, the distant baying of hounds on the hunt, the sound that had haunted the nightmares of every enslaved person who had ever contemplated escape. The pursuit had begun sooner than expected, suggesting that their absence had been discovered shortly after dawn. How? Naomi wondered aloud, her face pale beneath its sheen of sweat and grime. The stable boy promised to wait. "Not his fault," Moses replied grimly. "They probably found Jenkins and Fletcher first, then checked the correction house when we didn't report for morning work. Once they discovered the bodies..." He didn't need to finish the thought. The murder of 2 white men would provoke a response beyond the usual pursuit of escaped slaves. Every plantation for miles around would contribute to the hunt. Every white man with a gun and a horse would join the search, driven by fear and the need to make a brutal example of the 5 who had dared to strike back against their oppressors. "We need to split up," Elijah said, his voice stronger than it had been all night. "Divide their forces." "No," Ruth objected immediately. "We stay together. That was the plan." "Plans change," Elijah countered. "Listen to those dogs. They have our scent, and they're gaining. Together we're easy to track. Separated, some of us might make it." A heavy silence fell over the group as they considered this desperate strategy. The baying of the hounds grew incrementally louder, confirming Elijah's assessment of their situation. The swamp had slowed but not stopped the pursuit. "He's right," Moses acknowledged finally, his face set in lines of grim resignation. "We need to split up. 2 groups, different directions. The dogs will have to choose which trail to follow." The decision, once made, was implemented with swift efficiency. Moses would take Elijah, continuing southwest toward the river. Samuel, Ruth, and Naomi would head southeast, creating a false trail before circling back to join the others if possible. They divided the supplies and weapons, Moses keeping the pistol, Samuel taking Jenkins' hunting knife, the women armed with their improvised weapons from the correction house. "If we're not at the river in 3 days, don't wait," Moses instructed, clasping Samuel's shoulder in farewell. "Keep moving north, find the underground railroad. Get word to the maroon communities if you can." The younger man nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. 3 days, he repeated. "We'll be there." The women embraced briefly, no words necessary to express what might be a final farewell. Elijah, somewhat revived by the brief rest and the urgency of their situation, gripped each of their hands in turn. "Psalm 91, he told them, his voice barely audible above the ambient sounds of the swamp. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust." With these words of comfort and protection surrounding them, the 5 separated. Moses and Elijah heading southwest on 2 horses, Samuel, Ruth, and Naomi turning southeast on the remaining 2. The parting was quick, without unnecessary sentiment or prolonged goodbyes. They were beyond such luxuries now, focused solely on survival. Samuel led the way for his group, choosing a path that kept to the shallower water, where the horses could maintain a reasonable pace. Ruth followed close behind, with Naomi now riding alone on the 4th horse. They pushed forward relentlessly, the sound of the pursuing hounds fading slightly as the dogs were forced to choose between the diverging trails. "They're following Moses and Elijah," Ruth observed after they had traveled for perhaps an hour. "The dogs' voices are moving away from us." Samuel nodded, his expression troubled. "They're following the stronger scent, Elijah's blood." The implication hung unspoken between them. Their companions had effectively sacrificed themselves to give the others a chance, becoming the primary target for the pursuit by virtue of Elijah's wound blood trail. It was a tactical decision, cold but logical, and one that Moses would have made knowingly. "We should circle back now," Naomi suggested, her voice tight with tension. "Try to reach the river before them, maybe find a way to help." "Not yet," Samuel countered. "We need to lay a false trail first, make them waste time if they do pick up our scent later." They continued southeast for another hour, deliberately leaving signs of their passage that would be obvious to experienced trackers: broken branches, disturbed moss, even items of clothing torn and left hanging from low-hanging limbs. Only when Samuel was satisfied that they had created a convincing trail did they change direction, cutting due west through a particularly dense section of swamp where the water was deep enough to hide their horses' tracks. The maneuver cost them precious time and energy, the horses struggling in the deeper water, the humans constantly alert for quicksand, snakes, or alligators. By midday, all three were exhausted, their clothes soaked and muddy, their skin covered in insect bites and scratches from overhanging branches. "We need to rest," Ruth insisted, as Naomi swayed dangerously in her saddle. "Just for an hour. The horses can't go on like this either." Samuel reluctantly agreed, guiding them to a small island of relatively dry land where cypresses grew in a tight cluster, their massive roots creating natural shelters at water level. They secured the horses to low branches, allowing the animals to drink and graze on the sparse vegetation, while they themselves collapsed in the meager shade, sharing the last of their water and a few strips of dried meat. "How far to the river, do you think?" Naomi asked as she chewed the tough jerky. Samuel shook his head. "I'm not sure. Maybe a day's travel at this pace, maybe more. The swamp seems to go on forever." Ruth stared out across the water, her expression distant. "We should never have split up," she said quietly. "We should have stayed together, faced whatever came as one." "It was the right decision," Samuel replied, though without much conviction. "This way, some of us have a chance." "And the others?" Ruth challenged. "Moses and Elijah. What chance do they have with the dogs on their trail and Elijah half dead from his wounds?" Samuel had no answer to this, and they lapsed into uneasy silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their brief rest offering little true respite from the danger that surrounded them. It was Naomi who first sensed something was wrong. She sat up suddenly, her head tilted as if listening for a sound just at the edge of perception. "The birds," she whispered. "They've stopped singing." The observation sent a chill through the others. The swamp, for all its dangers, was alive with sound. Bird calls, insect buzzing, the splash of creatures in the water. But now an unnatural silence had fallen over their immediate vicinity, as if the wildlife had suddenly fled or gone into hiding. "Get to the horses," Samuel ordered, reaching for Jenkins' hunting knife. "Now." They moved with urgent quiet, gathering their minimal belongings and preparing to mount. But before they could reach the animals, the reason for the silence revealed itself in the form of three white men emerging from the water on the opposite side of the small island, their rifles raised and aimed directly at the fugitives. "Don't move, niggers," the leader called, a tall man with a weathered face and cold eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "Hands where we can see them." Behind the men, two hounds broke the surface of the water, swimming strongly toward the island, their baying replaced by eager whines as they caught fresh scent of their quarry. The pursuit had found them after all, not the main search party following Moses and Elijah, but a smaller group that had correctly guessed the fugitives might split up and had followed the second trail. Samuel's hand tightened on the knife hilt, his mind racing through increasingly desperate options. The hunters were 30 feet away, too far for a rush, and their rifles gave them an overwhelming advantage. Ruth and Naomi stood frozen, the suddenness of their capture leaving no time for the suicide pact they had tacitly agreed to if cornered. "That's them all right," one of the hunters confirmed, a younger man with a patchy beard and eager eyes. "The girl from the house, the field woman, and the fast one. 3 of the 5. "Where are the others?" the leader demanded, keeping his rifle trained on Samuel, clearly identifying him as the primary threat. "The blacksmith and the preacher. Talk now, and maybe you don't get shot where you stand." Samuel remained silent, his posture tense but his expression giving away nothing. Ruth and Naomi likewise offered no response, their silence a final act of defiance in the face of recapture. The third hunter, a heavy-set man with a florid face streaming with sweat, laughed humorlessly. "Don't matter if they talk or not. The others can't have gone far, not with the dogs on their trail and half the county out looking." "Tie them up," the leader ordered, wading closer to the island while keeping his rifle ready. Livingston's offering $100 for each one brought back alive, plus another 100 for information leading to the other 2. As the hunters approached with rope and obvious intent, Samuel made his decision. With a sudden explosive movement, he lunged toward the nearest man, Jenkins' knife flashing in the dappled sunlight. The blade connected with flesh, drawing a startled cry of pain as it sliced deep into the hunter's arm, causing him to drop his rifle into the shallow water. The leader's rifle cracked in response, the bullet narrowly missing Samuel as he dodged behind a cypress trunk. Ruth and Naomi scattered in different directions, seeking cover among the trees and tangled roots, as chaos erupted on the small island. "Shoot the women if they run," the leader shouted, working the lever of his rifle to chamber another round. "But I want the boy alive." Samuel used the momentary confusion to circle behind another tree, positioning himself for another attack. The wounded hunter was cursing fluently, blood streaming from the deep gash in his arm, while the heavy-set man waded toward the island, a pistol now in his hand instead of a rifle. Ruth had found herself backed against the water's edge, with no clear path of escape. As the heavy-set hunter approached her, pistol raised, she made a split-second decision. Diving sideways into the water, she swam with powerful strokes toward deeper sections of the swamp, hoping to lose herself among the cypress trunks and floating vegetation. A shot rang out, the bullet striking the water inches from her head, sending up a spray that momentarily blinded her. The hunter fired again, and this time Ruth felt a searing pain across her upper arm as the bullet grazed her flesh. Still, she kept swimming, her mind focused solely on escape, on survival, on the promise of freedom that had driven them this far. Naomi, meanwhile, had climbed partway up one of the larger cypresses, using the gnarled trunk and low branches to conceal herself from the hunters below. From her perch, she could see the entire island and the surrounding water. Samuel was moving stealthily from tree to tree, the knife still in his hand, blood now staining the blade. The leader was tracking him, rifle at the ready, while the wounded hunter had managed to retrieve his weapon from the water and was trying to determine if it would still fire. The dogs complicated matters, their training making them effective, even in the confusing environment of the swamp. One had picked up Samuel's trail and was following him among the trees, its excited baying giving away his position to the hunters. The other had entered the water after Ruth, swimming strongly in pursuit. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the deadly game unfolding beneath her. They had come so far, endured so much, only to be cornered like animals in this god-forsaken swamp. The bitter irony was not lost on her. They had fled one form of captivity, only to find themselves trapped in another, the vastness of the swamp offering the illusion of freedom, while ultimately becoming just another prison. Samuel suddenly broke from cover, making a desperate dash toward the horses that were still tethered at the far side of the island. The leader tracked him with his rifle, taking careful aim at the running figure. "No!" Naomi screamed, abandoning her concealment to create a distraction. "Samuel down!" Her warning came just in time. Samuel dropped and rolled as the rifle cracked, the bullet passing over him to thud into a cypress trunk. In the same moment, Naomi launched herself from her perch, landing heavily on the back of the distracted leader, her weight driving him face first into the shallow water. The man thrashed beneath her, trying to throw her off, but Naomi clung with the strength of desperation, forcing his head under the surface, her hands finding his neck and tightening with a ferocity she had never known herself capable of. This was no Jenkins or Fletcher, bound and helpless before execution. This was combat, primal and direct, with her life and freedom hanging in the balance. The leader bucked and twisted beneath her, his strength far exceeding hers, but Naomi had the advantage of position and surprise. She maintained her grip, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the screaming of her muscles, focused solely on keeping him submerged until his struggles ceased. Meanwhile, Samuel had reached the horses and managed to untie one before the heavy-set hunter rounded the island, having given up the pursuit of Ruth. The man fired his pistol, the shot going wild as Samuel mounted the horse bareback and kicked it toward the water's edge. "Naomi!" he shouted, extending his hand as he guided the horse alongside the struggle taking place in the shallows. "Come on!" With a final savage pressure on the leader's neck, Naomi released her grip and reached for Samuel's outstretched hand. He pulled her up behind him on the horse as the animal plunged into deeper water, swimming strongly away from the island. Behind them, the wounded hunter had finally determined his rifle was useless, the powder wet from its dunking. In frustration, he drew a pistol from his belt and fired after the escaping fugitives, the shot falling short as Samuel and Naomi increased their distance from the island. "Ruth?" Naomi gasped, clinging to Samuel as the horse struggled through the water. "She went east," Samuel replied, guiding the exhausted animal toward a tangle of cypress roots that offered momentary concealment. "If she got away, she'll head for the river." That was the plan. They pushed on through the swamp, constantly alert for sounds of pursuit. The horse, already tired from their long journey, began to falter in the difficult terrain. They were forced to dismount and continue on foot, leading the animal through shallower sections and swimming alongside it where the water deepened. As dusk approached, they caught a glimpse of Ruth's distinctive red headscarf among the trees ahead. She had survived the pursuit and was waiting for them in a small clearing, her arm crudely bandaged with a strip torn from her skirt, her face drawn with pain and exhaustion, but her eyes still fierce with determination. "I thought you were dead," she said simply as they approached. "Not yet," Samuel replied, embracing her briefly, "but we need to keep moving. They'll bring more men once those three don't return." They continued through the night, pushing themselves beyond the limits of endurance, driven by the knowledge that to stop was to die. Dawn found them stumbling with fatigue, the swamp seeming endless in all directions, hope fading with each painful step. And then they heard it, the distinctive sound of running water, different from the still pools and sluggish channels of the swamp. The river, at last. Breaking through a final barrier of cypress and tangled vines, they emerged onto the bank of the Mississippi, its vast expanse of muddy water flowing powerfully southward. And there, pulled up onto a small beach of silt, was a flat-bottomed boat. Beside it stood Moses, rifle in hand, watchful and waiting. "Elijah?" Ruth asked as they approached, her voice barely audible over the river's flow. Moses shook his head once, his expression stoic, but his eyes reflecting a deep, contained grief. "He's at peace now, free at last." They boarded the boat in silence, pushing off into the current that would carry them northward, toward the distant promise of freedom. Behind them lay death and bondage. Ahead, uncertainty and hope. They were 5 no longer, but 4 survivors united by blood, sacrifice, and an unbreakable will to live as human beings, not property. The swamp had claimed one of their number, but had also provided sanctuary and passage to the river that might lead to a new life. As the current caught the boat, carrying them away from the land of their enslavement, they each silently honored Elijah's sacrifice and renewed their commitment to the freedom he had died seeking. This was the story of the Natchez 5, Moses Johnson, Elijah Williams, Ruth Carter, Samuel Green, and Naomi Turner. Of the 5 who escaped the Livingston plantation in July 1855, only 4 survived the treacherous journey through the Mississippi swamps. Moses, Ruth, Samuel, and Naomi eventually reached free soil in Illinois via the Underground Railroad 3 months later. Elijah Williams succumbed to his wounds during the escape and was buried in an unmarked grave along the banks of the Mississippi. The murders of overseers Jenkins and Fletcher sparked increased security and harsher conditions on plantations throughout Natchez, but also inspired 23 successful escapes over the following 2 years. The 4 survivors settled in Chicago, where they remained until their deaths, never returning to the South even after emancipation. The echoes of the Natchez Five's desperate fight for freedom resonate through time, a stark reminder of the brutal reality faced by those who dared to challenge the institution of slavery. If these untold stories of defiance and survival stir your soul, join our community. Subscribe to this channel to uncover more hidden truths from the shadows of American slavery. Your support helps us keep these powerful narratives alive.